Wake up. It's the Sleep Unplugged podcast with Dr. Chris Winter. This is episode 34. Next position, please. The science of sleeping positions. Welcome, everyone, to the Sleep Unplugged podcast. My name is Dr. Chris Winter. I'm a neurologist and sleep specialist, and I am very excited for you to be here listening to this podcast. If you're new to the show, welcome to the family. If you are a veteran, welcome back. We are glad to have you again. Been a big week. Very excited about our last podcast on CBTI. By far and away, the biggest podcast yet by the numbers. Big numbers, really surprising numbers. And that really excites me because of all the podcasts we've done, that is a big message that I want to get out into the world, that there is hope for your insomnia. There is a treatment that works really well if you're going to put in the work. And there are people out there who are qualified to give it to you. So really excited that CBTI episode did as well as it did. Very, very pleased with that. So really excited to dive into our topic today. Before we do, just a couple of notes. Number one, thank you to Karen Johnson, who's a friend of the podcast. You all may know her as one of our award winners at the end of the year. I got to have dinner with her a couple nights ago in her hometown of Springfield, Mass. She was lovely to take the time out and meet. So energetic, so knowledgeable, an absolutely radiant individual. If you ever have a chance to listen to her speak, I would highly suggest you do it. And if you're really interested in helping with the cause to support our adoption of permanent standard time, give Dr. Sleepy Karen a follow. You can find her on my Twitter page. You can find me on Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter TikTok. I posted a picture of her, and you can find links to her on there. She's outstanding. You can also follow the show on our YouTube page at Sleep Unplugged, where we post videos of all of our episodes. I actually thought there was episode 31 was lost. I thought I deleted all the videos because I thought I'd uploaded them all, but I actually found them. So we have a complete video library on YouTube, and we're closing in on 100 subscribers on the YouTube page. So really thrilled that you all are finding the podcast in various ways and supporting it. Please don't hesitate to reach out to the show. I also want to give a big shout out to Jade Wu. Jade Wu, Sleep Peep, and a buddy of mine just released her first book. It's called Hello Sleep. And if you turn to page 343, you'll find the acknowledgments. Yes, 343, you can get through it. And if you go to the page 343, there's a paragraph that says, "My gratitude goes to the friends and colleagues who contributed their valuable time and expertise." She names some docs, and the last doctor she names is Dr. W. Chris Winter. Your insights have been invaluable. That, my friends, is how you win the coveted 2023 Sleep Unplugged awards we give out at the end of the year and take home the trucker hat. Jade Wu is not messing around. She knows how to play the game. She got her book out early. She is acknowledging me in the credits. She has a place on a shelf in her house ready for the trucker hat. She's not messing around. So for authors out there writing sleep books, that's the way you play the game. That's the way you influence the voting committee of the yearly Sleep Unplugged Best of Awards, and that's how you take home a trucker hat. So I'm kidding, of course. I really appreciate that, Jade. I actually got to read Jade's book a little ahead of time and actually wrote a blurb for it on the back of her book, and think it's outstanding. And she's the kindest person you'll ever meet, and when you read the book, you'll hear it in her tone. She cares about you. She wants you to overcome your insomnia. So please support Jade Wu and Hello Sleep. We usually do sort of messages or letters to the show at this time. I'm going to do two. The first is Shirley. Shirley and I had a communication. She wanted to talk to me about the co-sleeping episode. She recently lost her dog, Lucy, a 16-year-old Beagle, Jack Russell mix. and she's really torn up about it. Now, Lucy did not sleep in bed with Shirley. Lucy didn't want to sleep in bed with Shirley. Lucy wanted her own bed in the bedroom. She was a very loyal dog to Shirley, and I think Shirley took her loss, as many people do, very hard. Lucy has been cremated, and Shirley told me that when she dies, Lucy is getting buried with her, and going wherever they go together. And so Lucy is sitting on her mantle right now. Shirley says she talks to her every day, which I think is perfectly fine. And I just really appreciate Shirley reaching out and sharing uh, the story about her dog and the bond that they had. And I take that very seriously, and I'm sort of humbled by that, Shirley. So we're saluting Lucy today on the Sleep Unplugged podcast, and all other pets that are meaningful to their owners. We think about them a lot. I've got a couple of my own, and they're like little buddies. So we're thinking about Lucy today, Shirley. I also want to touch on a quick letter that relates to the podcast today. This comes from Sophie, and Sophie wrote the show a while back and said, "Hey Chris, I'd really love if you could do an episode on sleeping positions. I have a personal issue that I'm a horrific stomach sleeper. Um, she said it's been fine, but over the last few weeks, she's really having a lot of lower back pain. Sometimes even with a pillow stuck between her legs, she still manages to get herself onto her stomach." And she writes parenthetically, "It's hard to even picture what I look like when I get in that position. Trying to train myself to get off of my back. I've got terrible low back pain now." And just really wish you could kind of shine a light on that sleeping position. So that's what the topic today is for the podcast, sleeping positions. For those of you who are wondering, okay, what's the inside joke with the title? We usually try to work in some sort of interesting musical trivia with the title. The title for the podcast this week comes from Cheap Trick. Their seventh album um, was released in 1983, and it was called Next Position Please. It's kind of a forgettable album. The song itself, Next Position Please, is kind of a regrettable song lyrically. But what I love about Next Position Please is the cover art. And on the cover is the band, and they're making fun of Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run cover picture. So I want you to look up Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run, classic album, just one of the best, and not only in terms of musically, but I love the cover. I mean, it's just an iconic album cover. And Cheap Trick had a very keen sense of humor during their career, are kind of making fun of it. And it's right up there with sort of the Clash and Elvis Presley covers, when you look at those two together. It's interesting, too, if you look at Rick Nielsen, their guitarist, who's on the far left. He's got 8.5 fingers extended. They were going to call the album 8.5 because they actually released an EP of 4 songs. So that would have been their 8th album, technically. And then so this would have been 8.5 if you count that as a full album. So that's why he's got his fingers in the positions that he does. I was going to, there's another, this album was released in 83. Another important 7th album was released in 84, and that was Leonard Cohen's Various Positions. We talked about that early in the podcast because that was the album that featured Hallelujah. It also has a song that was a personal favorite of mine, If It Be Your Will. So we could have gone in that direction. I think Leonard Cohen's album is Money. But since we had talked about that before, and I kind of like the title Next Position Please, we went with that. So here we are. What are we talking about? We're talking about sleeping positions, and it's something the media likes to talk about and write about a lot, in terms of what's the best sleeping position. I always hate that question because it really has a lot to do with what are your goals? What are you trying to achieve with the best sleeping position? The best sleep quality, fewer wrinkles, better cardiovascular, parameters, etc. So we'll touch on a bunch of different topics related to sleep position. The first thing I want to mention about sleep position is a lot of patients think they know what position they sleep in, But sleep studies often reveal the fact that you have no idea what position you're sleeping in. So just because you start off on your side and end up on your side doesn't necessarily mean that you didn't flip over to your back 50 times during the night. It's really interesting to talk to patients after they've had sleep studies about their sleep positions, and they often have no idea they spend as much time as they do in various positions. One thing I would caution you, if you've had a sleep study, particularly an in-lab sleep study, you're aware that it's an unusual night. You're in an unusual bed. There's a camera watching you. You've got wires taped and glued all over your body. So for a lot of people, that sleep study is not a fair representation of their sleeping positions, meaning you get all taped up and all wired up and you stretch out on your back and you tend to stay there because you're nervous that if you move around a lot, you're going to pull the wires and upset the tech that worked really hard to get them glued on there. So, a good sleep lab, a good tech is going to work to try to get patients to sleep in various positions throughout the night because we want to see what your sleep, your breathing looks like as you move through those different positions. That's one of the downsides of a home sleep study. And I'll mention while I'm thinking about it, one more letter. Tyler wrote in and said, "Hey, I heard your study. I've decided to do a sleep study. It got denied by my insurance, and now I'm having to do a home sleep study. What can I do to change the insurance's mind because it's not a good study?" I think it's important to note that a home sleep study is still a good study. It may not be quite as good as an in-lab study, but it's okay. One of the downsides, Tyler, you're probably going to end up having to do the home study anyway, and it's fine. And it may show, exactly what your doctor needs to see. One of the problems with the home study is that body position is typically recorded by the device, but it's not perfect, meaning that sometimes you're actually on your back, it thinks you're on your side. That generally doesn't happen in an in-lab study because there is a real person watching the study to figure out what position you're in. So appreciate you writing in, Tyler. I think the home study is probably going to be okay, but that can be a conversation you have with your doctor, which is, do you think the home study is okay? And if not, what do we need to provide the insurance company to get them to approve the in-lab study? So let's jump into some topics. I'm going to touch base on a few right off the bat. Um, I don't consider them frivolous, but I would say that the evidence behind them is fleeting. So much so that we're not going to talk about particular studies because they either don't exist or I think they're so weak they're not worth mentioning. And some of those are glaucoma. Does body sleeping position influence glaucoma? There is some anecdotal, I don't even want to say evidence. There are some studies that might suggest that body position could lend itself to the development or exacerbation of glaucoma, typically sleeping on your stomach. Um, uh, there was a 2022 study that looked at that and said, well, this is very weak data, and the issue is still to some degree unclear. We talked about glaucoma in a previous episode. Oh, I think it was snoring. That snoring may be an independent risk factor for glaucoma, which is now really interesting because you're going to probably snore worse when you're on your back. So let's say that glaucoma is being influenced, it seems, numerically by body position. There are more people when they sleep on their stomach showing evidence of glaucoma than in other body positions. That's really fascinating because if you flip somebody from their stomach to their back and they start snoring, that itself could be an independent risk factor for glaucoma. So the numbers are just not there to really make that determination. The other thing I want to mention is sort of, I would put under the umbrella of cosmetic, meaning that are you more likely to wrinkle your skin if you sleep on your side with your face kind of smashed into a pillow, or on your stomach with your face kind of down into the pillow versus lying flat on your back? There is some evidence to say that lying flat on your back is probably over time and a fairly long time, most likely, going to result potentially in fewer lines and wrinkles on your face. That sort of makes sense to me. Lying flat on your back, gravity is sort of pulling downward on your face instead of forward or being kind of smashed to the side. I mean, sometimes when I wake up and I look myself in the mirror, I seem to look different when I first wake up than maybe a couple hours later as my body kind of adjusts to not being smashed on its side. And I am a side sleeper. Although I moisturize pretty heavily to try to keep the visible lines and wrinkles to a minimum. So I think there might be some evidence there. The other one that I've seen tossed around a lot, but I don't see great evidence for, but it sort of it makes sense to me, is related to women and sort of their breasts. You know, if sleeping on your side or sleeping on your stomach is, you know, smashing them and making them look yet less youthful or sag in some way versus sleeping flat on your back, I could see where that might be a consideration. I've never really seen compelling evidence one way or the other about that. Although I did have a patient many years ago who actually had such a large chest and enjoyed sleeping on her stomach that she actually had a custom bed made that literally had sort of a well for her breasts built into the bed, like a ditch, so she could sleep in a much more comfortable position. Because I've had a lot of patients who struggle with that literally have to build that with pillows to try to support themselves, although I think most sleep on their side or on their back. um, so let's move on to some topics that probably have a little bit more evidence behind them. In our previous co-sleeping episode, we talked about infant and child sleeping positions, and that many years ago there was a big movement to start getting babies to sleep on their back. And when that occurred, the incidence of SIDS went down significantly. That was recently revisited again and shown that this was a 2020 study in sleep medicine that basically kind of revisited that guideline and, for lack of a better word, sort of re-supported it and said this continues to be the preferred position for babies to sleep in. Prior to having the baby, there is pregnancy, and there's a lot of talk about sleeping positions in pregnancy. There was a recent study of 148 women. This was in the Journal of Clinical Sleep Medicine in 2020, that basically said there are more breathing disturbances in pregnant women when they sleep on their back. Um, but it doesn't really seem to lend itself to bad pregnancy outcomes. And this was largely restricted to the third term. So I've seen evidence and communications about, look, you know, most of our venous return is happening on the right side of our body. So perhaps women who are pregnant should sleep on the left side of their body to sort of help venous return to the heart and blood flow to the fetus. This sort of falls under that category of, it makes sense, but there's not a lot of evidence to support that one way or the other in terms of there being actual harm to either the mother or the child. There have been studies looking at sleep apnea in pregnancy. Women are a little bit more likely to have things like sleep apnea later in their pregnancy. We know restless leg as well too. And could the treatment of the sleep apnea perhaps improve pregnancy outcomes? There have been studies where women have worn CPAPs, slept with the head of their bed slightly elevated, or off of their back. Again, nothing terribly compelling, but certainly could be filed under, well, sleeping a little bit more upright to be more comfortable, to breathe a little bit better, to snore less, disturb your partner, maybe awaken fewer times during the night. All filed under, you know, really can't hurt things. But again, no great compelling evidence there too. The next topic that I think about a lot when it comes to sleeping position is pain. So when you think about the most orthopedically correct position to sleep in, it's probably flat on our backs, maybe with our head a little elevated, maybe with your legs a little elevated. If you've got an adjustable base bed, you can put it in that 0G position where your back's a little bit elevated, your feet are a little bit elevated, you've got that sort of slope, and it feels really nice. I mean, some people describe it as feeling like a little massage, even though nothing's really happening. Um, so I think for individuals who are struggling with pain, particularly shoulder, hip, knee pain, there can be advantages to sleeping on your back. There was a study in 2018 looking at individuals with glenohumeral pain, sort of shoulder pain. If you ask me what is the pain that's probably most influenced by sleeping position, I would say it's shoulder. If anybody's ever had a shoulder replacement, I have not. I've taken care of a lot of people who have. It is really, really hard on your sleep. They all sleep in recliners. They can't get comfortable. If they even slightly roll over into that shoulder that was operated on, they're levitating off the bed in pain. There's also an issue a lot with the pitchers that we work with. A lot of pitchers in Major League Baseball will sleep on their side, but they don't sleep on their throwing arm side for obvious reasons. And what was interesting was the study was looking at, well, does sleeping on your shoulder result in more issues with glenohumeral pain? And they expected to see that, yes, it would. It was actually the opposite. And the authors were really surprised by the result and felt like what's probably happening in this study is that and this was, I think it was only, it was like 70, I don't remember how many people were in it, but I think what they thought was, well, people with this pain are learning to sleep off of it from an early place. And so when we got them into this cohort, they were already conditioned to not go to that shoulder, which was kind of an interesting sort of situation. But I think that for individuals who do struggle with shoulder and hip pain, sleeping on the back can be better, or really being deliberate and smart about the sleeping surface and choosing something that reduces those pressure points can be extremely helpful. Gastroesophageal reflux is another big one. And as we kind of mentioned with sleep apnea, elevating the head of the bed can be extremely helpful, so that you're actually creating sort of a gravitational stop to the reflux of gastroesophageal contents into your esophagus. For a lot of people, though, they don't like to sleep elevated, or they may not have the adjustable bed, or don't want four pillows shoved behind their head. So what they found in studies was that, and this was a 2022 study in a journal out of Amsterdam, I believe, where they actually looked at sleeping position, left side, right side, back, and showed that you're much more likely to succeed in treating GERD by sleeping on the left side. They call it the left lateral decubitus position. So it's kind of, imagine sleeping on your left side with your knees up just a little bit. It's kind of the position you put somebody in when you're getting ready to do a spinal tap, kind of the fetal position on your left side. That those patients, I think there were 100 patients randomized to either left or right, that they were 44% less likely to have GERD on the left versus 24 on the right, if I'm recalling that correctly. And you'd think, well, it's your stomach. What does it matter? Well, if you actually look, if you type into a Google search stomach anatomy or something like that, you can see the way the stomach is sort of situated, with the fundus, that big circular part of your stomach, kind of sticking off to the left. So when you sort of sleep on the left side, you create a situation where the gastric contents kind of pool in that fundus, and most importantly, are not directed back to the esophagus. Now, if you flip over and start sleeping on your right, that fundus is sort of elevated and everything in it kind of aims right towards the esophagus from which it came. And you can see some diagrams if you look that up online. They make sense when you look at it. You can see how there's a much more direct shot for your stomach contents to go back up into your esophagus when you're sleeping on your right side versus your left. So if you're somebody who's like, look, I can sleep in any position I want, I have a lot of reflux, I might even have a little bit of sleep apnea, and we know reflux and sleep apnea tend to be related, and you can choose your left side. I am a left side sleeper, but that's also because I sleep on the left side of the bed. For some couples, it's difficult to sleep on your left side if you're on the right side of the bed, because now you're facing your partner, which if you like that, and that's kind of what you two of you look at each other all through the night, that's great. But for some people, they don't want to do that. So choose the side of your bed carefully. It may influence your development of GERD. Um, Interestingly, there was a study, it was a very low powered, poor study back in 2022. It was like 13 patients in a journal called Sensors that said right sided sleeping showed fewer movements and better sleep, which I thought was kind of interesting. No real explanation for it, um, but just as a counterpoint. But I think if you were to talk to a lot of sleep doctors, they would basically say it's probably better from a cardiovascular venous return perspective, from a GERD perspective, just be on your left side and you're probably going to do a bit better. Um, the last thing that I kind of wanted to talk about in this podcast was some research that's often quoted. In fact, I was quoted many years ago, I think by CNN, about this. And I'm not going to say I was misquoted, but without everything that I said to this interviewer, it seemed like I was really arguing that body position made a difference in terms of the development of Alzheimer's disease. And on the record, I don't, or I don't know. I'm not, there's not a lot of compelling evidence. And what this is related to is a study that came out in 2015 in the journal of, I think, Journal of Neuroscience. And one of the authors was a woman named Nedergaard, who actually was the discoverer really of our brain's glymphatic system. We haven't talked about that, I don't think, on the podcast yet. We'll get to it at some point. But the glymphatic system is sort of the lymphatic system of the brain. It's a system for removing waste products from the brain. And she said in this study, and she was one of several authors, probably about 7 of them, I think, that in rats, that it seemed that when they slept on their side, that glymphatic system was more efficient at removing waste products. And the main waste product that's being eliminated typically by the glymphatic system that we care about is a protein called beta amyloid. It is the protein that accumulates in Alzheimer's disease. And this glymphatic pump is like 10 times more active than when we sleep, which is one of the reasons why we've always known that individuals who do not sleep enough, we're not talking about insomnia, so all the insomnia patients, just relax. We're talking about people who work until midnight, go to bed, wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning, go to the gym, and never look back until they get back in bed at midnight. Like, they're truly depriving themselves of sleep, not people who are getting in bed, takes them 2 hours to fall asleep. So sleep deprivation has always been sort of linked with diminishing illness and Alzheimer's disease. And when Nedergaard made this discovery, it all kind of came together. So this study is interesting, and I'm not suggesting that it's not important or not real. Maybe there is a very real reason why we should all be sleeping, like I said, on our left side, to give that system of removing plaque the best opportunity to do so. I'm not sure we can necessarily say that about a study on rodents. And one of the episodes I will do on this podcast one day is my love-hate relationship with neuroscience. I love neuroscience. I think people who are going into neuroscience are outstanding. I consider myself a neuroscientist in some ways. Not really. I mean, I'm a clinician, but whatever. I think what we run into is we put a podcast microphone in front of somebody who's a neuroscientist, and suddenly we're telling people sleeping off of your side will eliminate or greatly reduce your chance of having Alzheimer's disease. And that's the entire conversation. And there's a lot more to it than that. So I'm not suggesting not sleeping on your left side. I'm just saying, look, it was some mice. It was an interesting study. I'm not sure we can extrapolate that to the human population as a way of curing Alzheimer's disease, but certainly something to think about. So that's it. Sleeping positions. You can think of the P's: body position for pain, body position for pregnancy, uh, body position for, I can't think of any other P's, Alzheimer's disease, dementing illness, cosmetic, your baby, lots of different things to think about when you choose body position. And I would just sort of throw in there lots of reasons to think about your pillow, because your body position dramatically influences what kind of pillow you need. So I tell people all the time, give your pillow some thought. It does make a difference. And I'll just put a disclaimer out there. I do some scientific consultation work for sleep.com and Mattress Firm. Great place to get a pillow, but I'm not, just wanted to be clear there. I'm not trying to sell you any particular pillow. I want you to find out the information about what you need for your pillow and seek out what works best for you. So that's it. Sleeping positions, next position, please. Next episode of the podcast, please. Really excited that you're here listening to the podcast. This podcast is growing faster than you could imagine, and it's all because of you and your support. I love my Sleep Unplugged family. You all are the best. Please like, subscribe, follow the podcast. Please drop a review at some point. I would really appreciate that. You can buy my books, The Sleep Solution, Why Your Sleep is Broken and How to Fix It, as well as The Rested Child, Why Your Tired, Wired, or Irritable Child May Have a Sleep Disorder and How to Help. They are available now. You can follow us at Dr. Chris Winter Twitter, Dr. Chris Winter Instagram, Dr. Chris Winter TikTok, if you want to go there. And you can like and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you very much for all the messages that you all send in. Sorry I can't get to them all. You all are so kind to communicate. And Sophie G, I hope this is helpful in terms of your considerations of sleep position. I hope your back feels better. Maybe find a pillow that really influences your ability to stay on your side, or some technology. There's all kinds of interesting vibratory technology like you can put on your body, and when you get off of your side onto your stomach, it'll start to vibrate to remind you to get on your side. And actually, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine used to call that sort of positional therapy sort of, a consideration, but because of all this technology now, it's really evolved in terms of a much better treatment for things like sleep apnea. But that technology might help you find something that can get you off of your stomach and get you in the position you want to be in. So until next episode of the Sleep Unplugged podcast, I am Dr. Chris Winter. Sleep well.